Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israelis head to the parks over the holiday weekend to enjoy some renewed freedom from the pandemic. Meanwhile, political stalemates continue in the week after fourth elections, and Israeli athletes win big on the world stage. The holiday of Passover beginning over the weekend, and Israelis taking full advantage with coronavirus waning and the whole country more or less reopened. Jews around the world celebrating Passover this week with the first night's meal, or seder, held on Saturday. The holiday marking the Jews' exodus from slavery in ancient Egypt. Families in Israel hosting guests with peace of mind for the first time in a long time as COVID lockdowns are lifted. And Israelis at the new embassy in the United Arab Emirates similarly celebrating, with Israeli Ambassador Eitan Naeh sharing moments live online. Then new UAE Ambassador to Israel Mohammed Al-Khaja also sending well wishes from abroad, tweeting both in Hebrew and in English that we have much to rejoice and look forward to as we celebrate ideals of freedom and hopeful new beginnings. Meanwhile, back in Israel, the holiday weekend arriving with warm, sunny weather, over 130,000 jumping at the chance to hit the beaches, hiking trails, nature reserves, and parks, about 1,000 of whom even celebrated Seder in the nature reserve's parking lot overnight, as they were kept open for larger parties. A huge departure from last year, where strict virus regulations kept most citizens at home with the nuclear family. Of course, Jews aren't the only ones celebrating with renewed freedom this weekend in Israel either. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem opening to the public for Palm Sunday, or the start of Holy Week, which ends with Easter next week on April 4. And hundreds coming out for the annual procession recreating Jesus' route from the Mount of Olives and into the Holy City. Palm Sunday commemorating the day Jesus rode into Jerusalem only to be crucified within the week, while Easter being the day that he's said to have risen from the dead. And the messages behind this gospel taking on new meaning in the wake of the pandemic.
احنا في وضع الموجود فيه كورونا، الوضع اللي كتير صعب على الجميع، وكنا بنحب انه كمان تكون الاوضاع بكتير احسن، يكون في خير وسلام، وتروح الكورونا من كل العالم لحتى لانه احنا تعبنا كتير نفسيا.
Last year was a terrible Easter without people, closed doors. This year is much better. The door are open. We don't have a lot of people, but we feel more hopeful that things will become better. The message of Easter is life and love. Despite all the signs of death, corona, pandemic, whatever, we believe in the power of love and life.
Finally, the third of the Abrahamic faiths, Islam, is also gearing up for its own celebrations. The holy month of Ramadan commemorating Muhammad's first revelation beginning April 13th and ending May 12th. Practicing adult Muslims marking the month with daily prayers, fasts, and reflections as one of the 5 pillars or duties in Islam. On a related note, despite the lifting of lockdowns and the weekend celebrations, COVID infections in Israel are still falling, and that's not all. Hannah Rifkin reporting.
The first major holiday without lockdown restrictions in over a year. Israelis settling in for Passover amidst a still dropping coronavirus infections rate of about 1.2%. And the numbers are expected to continue dropping, with roughly 60% of Israelis now protected against the virus. This as over 816,000 Israelis have recovered from infection, while over 4.7 million, or over half the general population, has been fully vaccinated against COVID with both vaccine doses. Meanwhile, active infections dropping below 10,000, serious infections below 500, and the daily death toll likewise falling to single digits. New reports showing that the majority of COVID-related deaths in Israel were due to hospital overcrowding and a mounting caseload, a problem largely eliminated by the vaccine program. Then, good news getting better. While warning citizens to stay vigilant, health ministry officials are weighing the lifting of even more restrictions, including the mask mandate. This as Pfizer announces vaccine trials on children aged 11 and under. And as new studies by Israeli authorities conclude that there are still no Israeli COVID variants that are resistant to vaccines.
And now for the bad news. Renewed investments for additional stockpiles of COVID vaccines and for other, quote, urgent health needs have been delayed. This as the first cabinet meeting since Israel's fourth repeat elections is canceled over continued political infighting. The Likud and the blue and white parties still at each other's throats. Their failure to pass a state budget leading to the government's collapse in December and the fourth serial elections that followed. And now they're arguing over the Justice Ministry, leading to the weekly cabinet meeting being called off. Blue and White Chair Benny Gantz killing the first weekly meeting since March 23 elections, citing Prime Minister Netanyahu's reported refusal to appoint a permanent justice minister. Netanyahu, other Likud officials, and even health ministry authorities are firing back at Gantz, however, accusing him of setting Israel back by months and of irresponsibly endangering the well-being and health of all Israelis for political gain. And this, as canceling the meeting, meant delaying approval of a scheduled spending package on COVID vaccines for next year and other health needs. Likud in a statement now even claiming that vaccine manufacturers Pfizer and Moderna could scrap the agreements should they not be signed on time. This alleged fallout aside, though, the continuing squabbling in the wake of another indecisive election is leaving more and more Israelis disheartened by both their political system and the apparent ego of their politicians.
לצערי הרב, כמה שאנחנו רוצים שתהיה ממשלה, אני לא חושבת שהמנהיגים שנמצאים בפוליטיקה יעשו את מרב המאמצים בשביל העם, בשביל שתהיה ממשלה ושנימנע מעוד גל של בחירות. ככה, זה כמות החוסר אמונה שלי במנהיגות הפוליטית היום בישראל. אם הייתי חושבת שהם חושבים על האינטרסים שלנו, אז הם היו עושים הכל בשביל למנוע את הבחירות, לשים את האגו בצד, וטיפה להוריד מכבודם ולהגיד אנחנו פה בשביל העם, ובואו נקים ממשלה, לא משנה מה.
That said, some old partnerships and a couple of strange new ones may soon be on the horizon ahead of meetings with President Rivlin next month. Meetings where party heads are set to recommend a candidate for prime minister. This as neither side has a clear path to a coalition. The Netanyahu-led right-wing bloc only coming up with 59 seats to the anti-Netanyahu bloc's 57. And that's assuming that Naftali Bennett's Yamina party chooses Netanyahu in the end, which, as you can see, is still below the 61-seat minimum. So unless there's an unlikely defection or a massive change of heart, it appears that for the first time in Israel's history, an Islamist Arab-Israeli party, Ram, stands between fifth elections and a functional government. And both the Likud and the Yesh Atid parties are reportedly in talks with Ram chair Mansour Abbas to swing him their way. So what will it take to make a coalition? What wheels need greasing to prevent another election? Joining me to discuss is Blue and White Party Knesset member Michal Katler-Wunsch and Jeremy Salton, Director of English Operations and former candidate for Knesset for the Yamina Party. Thank you both so much for being with us. Now, Knesset member, I'm going to start with you. Yoaz Hendel, Yifat Shasha Biton, among others in the New Hope Party under Gideon Sa'ar, are claiming that the Likud is offering ministries and other positions to lure them into defecting and joining the coalition. So far, they've said, stop calling, the answer is no. But what are the chances that a defector from any party actually does close the deal for the Likud and for Netanyahu?
Well, I'd be foolish to anticipate the chances after we've seen everything we've seen. What I'd like to maybe focus on is the imperative for a functional government. So even if we talk about, a very narrow minority, that does not promise what Israel needs most, what we have seen over the better part of the last year. And that is, there's no vaccine for distrust. We need a functional government to propel Israel forward, to really maximize the opportunities alongside the tremendous challenges that COVID-19 leaves behind. And of course, with the vaccination rollout, and we've seen the numbers lowering and so forth, except that the real challenges begin to unfold now as we look forward, whether they're economic, health, mental health, and so on. And the real imperative for reform and for a functional government is really, really pressing as we look forward and not, yeah.
No, well, so I was going to ask, do you believe that with the really wide array of sometimes conflicting ideologies in the anti-Netanyahu bloc, do you think that they could form what you would call a functional government?
So very sadly for me, because all we've seen over the last election campaign is a focus on anti-Netanyahu or for Netanyahu and not anything that remotely resembles vision or principled understanding of what those plans will look like, long-term, transparent plans that are accountable to the public, that will be implemented equally and consistently. I don't know what will bind together this proposed coalition, whether it will have, the 61 necessary or not. And I'll say the missed opportunities that come alongside it, because what we've seen over and over is actually that the Israeli public is quite moderate. And I include Jews and Arabs, religious and secular. And even what we see now with Ram, and I don't know that this specific leadership represents those moderates in the way that they would like to be represented, meaning the imperative or the aspiration of Israeli Arab citizens to integrate as represented by what Ram represents, whether or not that's what they believe or not, in the state of Israel that is a Jewish and democratic state. And what a missed opportunity it will be, instead of reaching out and empowering the moderate voices that we see across the floor, if we do not manage to seize this historic opportunity, even in the wake of the Abraham Accords that you touched upon remotely before.
All right. Well, I want to get to Ram and their influence on coalition building in just a minute. But Jeremy, I want to first bring you into the conversation. What do you see as the best options here for a coalition? And I know your chairman from the Yamina Party, Naftali Bennett, is still not 100% behind anyone, really. He's saying, actually, of Yesh Atid's Lapid, that he's not truly focused on reconciliation. Where does Yamina fall? What's your ideal coalition today?
Look, we're in a situation where there is no clear winner. We're in a situation where no one really knows who won the election. That's just the reality of where we are. When you have on one side Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who say they won't even sit with Ra'am, the United Arab List of the Islamic fundamentalist Muslim Brotherhood group, it's difficult to say that that's even something of a possibility, or to even call Mansour Abbas a kingmaker. On the other side, you have Gideon Sa'ar, who says he won't sit with Balad, he won't sit with the joint list of the other three Arab parties on the right. So what are you left with? You're left with a situation where Lapid cannot form a government, where Netanyahu cannot form a government. And what you need to think about is something perhaps that is different than the paradigm of either Netanyahu or Lapid. Perhaps we need to get creative. We've seen a number of different scenarios and solutions that have been raised by various people over the last few days. We have a week until we get to the recommendation phase by the president's residence. I would say it could be a possibility that instead of the two people who we are expecting to get all of the nominations, that there is a third candidate that emerges. Perhaps there are more than three candidates that end up getting nominations in the president's residence. And I think that's something that we might need to go ahead and spend some time considering, because again, like I said, Gideon Sa'ar with the joint list and Smotrich and Ben Gvir along with Mansour Abbas. These are just, Michal was talking about stability. There is no coalition that can survive, even if we're talking about support from the outside, for even, I would say, just a couple of weeks in this scenario.
All right, well, let's talk now for a minute about Mansour Abbas, because I think he's at the top of everybody's head here. He's playing both sides recently. He's become very, you could say, pragmatic in his approach to forming a government. And even the Likud, we have a Likud member, Ayub Kara, who just met with him. They're giving him this sort of, mark of approval. What are the chances that Abbas's Ram party actually becomes the first Arab party in a coalition?
Zero. I mean, if you listen to what Mansour Abbas said himself, he said there are the two accepted models of coalition and opposition. What he's suggesting is a third model, which is to vote with the coalition without having the responsibilities of actually being within the coalition. So even if you ask Mansour Abbas, he's not looking to join as a full-fledged member of any coalition. But even in that type of a scenario, again, I just don't see the numbers, whether it's for Lapid, whether it is for Netanyahu. If you add Mansour Abbas's party with his 4 seats to either one of those two blocks, you need to go ahead and then subtract more MKs than Mansour Abbas brings to whatever confidence vote we would have in the Knesset to form that next government. Well, so again, I understand that he's the man of the hour and everyone wants to be talking about him, but I think that this is an overreaction to the power that he has. And if you will, this is something for both Lapid and Netanyahu, who both see they don't have a path. and are trying to make sure that the spotlight remains on the two of them as opposed to other creative options to go ahead and make sure that we spend the next week talking about Mansour Abbas.
All right, Knesset member Kotler-Wunsch, final comments, if you'd like to maybe respond to some of the things that Jeremy has said.
No, I just wanted to, reiterate a little bit of what Jeremy was talking about, and that is that there are multiple, sort of creative solutions, and the public has asked the elected leadership to find them. That is the responsibility of those elected officials. That is the responsibility of all those that, propose themselves to be the future or the current leaders of the state of Israel. And those creative solutions really demand that, everybody talks about, checking ego at the door or leaving it aside. Well, it's really not about, and you asked before who won or who lost the election, the public is losing. It is the Israeli public. And in that, we all share this real tremendous need and imperative for that stable government that Jeremy too talked about. But that requires not only the creativity of the solutions that will enable that, but inevitably placing the public's best interest above all else.
Some serious compromise, I think, is needed. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Knesset member Michal Kotler-Wunsch, Jeremy Sultan from Yamina, thank you both so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, and Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. A new Haaretz daily report citing unnamed Israeli and Jordanian sources is alleging that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delayed approving a Jordanian request for water from Israel over supposedly growing personal issues with the royal family in Amman. And sources go on to say that Netanyahu's actions likely indicate that the request will be denied, despite treaties and agreements between the two countries. So is there any truth to these allegations, and if so, what do they mean? Here with more is Middle East expert with NYU and the Moshe Dayan Center, Dr. Josh Krasnow. Dr. Krasnow, thank you so much for being with us. Now, do you believe the report?
So I've seen the report in Jordanian papers, but they're quoting Haaretz. So I wouldn't be surprised if at least the issue has been brought up, because this is an issue that has been often brought up in, let's say, conservative, not to say right-wing circles in Israel, since the issue of Tzofar and Naharaim, right? That if the Jordanians are keeping to the strict letter of the peace treaty, then there's no reason Israel shouldn't be keeping to the strict letter of peace treaty. So it could well be that it's an issue that has developed now, as you pointed out. You referred to as a personal tension. I don't think.
That's the allegation from Haaretz.
Yeah. So there's tension between Israel and Jordan. It's been going on for a long time. It sort of peaked during the discussions of the annexation of Jordan Valley. It's peaked even more in recent weeks with the sort of tit for tat we had last week. I wouldn't be surprised if this issue has been discussed. I would be surprised if it doesn't eventually get solved.
So you're saying you wouldn't be surprised if Israel were actually withholding water and other resources that we've agreed with Jordan to give them? So
it's a little bit complicated here. Under the agreement with Jordan, we are required to provide Jordan with a certain amount of water that comes from the Jordan River Basin, which is stored mostly in the Kinneret. But in recent years, certainly in the past 10 years, Israel has been providing more water under sort of side agreements than those that are actually required under the peace agreement. While the peace agreement requires us to provide 50 million cube, we are providing in many years up to 75. Now, the peace treaty does say that after the first 50 million, Israel would strive to provide another 50 million, but it doesn't require us to. So when the relationship is good, these issues tend to not come up. As I said, they were brooded a few years ago when the issue of Tzofar and Naharaim came up. This is the first time that if there was actually an Israeli, let's say, rejection of the Jordanian request, it would be the first time, but it would be theoretically within our rights. It wouldn't be a particularly neighborly thing to do, right, but it would be theoretically within our legal rights.
And what would be the aftermath or the aftershock or the consequences of going back to the minimum, so to speak?
So that's why I said that I'm not at all sure that's what will end up. I think, like I said, there was a kind of a tit for tat a while ago. The Jordanians were perceived by the Israeli government. I'm not sure if they perceive themselves as having crossed the line with not allowing, not giving permission for the prime minister to overfly them on the way to UAE,
right,
after what they saw and we didn't necessarily see as a calculated insult to their royal family. So, you know, I think there's in an election season, where the prime minister is often looking rightward, I think that it's not surprising to see these kind of things.
Interesting. All right. Well, I hope, as you said, a solution will be found very quickly in the near future. Dr. Krasna, thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
Moving on, Israeli athletes killing it on the world stage this weekend, starting with Israeli rhythmic gymnast Linoy Ashram, who won gold in the all-around individual event on Saturday at the Gymnastics World Cup in Bulgaria, one of 4 World Cup events before the 2021 Olympics this summer and a qualifier for the Olympics as well. Competing in the hoop, ball, and clubs and ribbons categories, the 21-year-old Ashram then also picked up a second gold and a bronze medal for individual challenges. But Ashram is no stranger to top marks in the world stage, having continued to work tirelessly with her trainer both before and after winning gold in Ukraine last year, becoming the first Israeli European all-around champion in the process as well. Meanwhile, Israel's soccer team also climbing world rankings, tying 1-1 with Scotland at the World Cup qualifiers in Tel Aviv over the weekend. And joining me with more is soccer pundit with Israel's Sport 5 network, Ram Chaim. Ram, thank you so much for being with us. Now, is Israel going to the World Cup?
No, unfortunately.
Short and sweet.
Yeah.
Why? Why can't we make it there?
Because the other teams in the group are much more stronger. And I look at the game of yesterday from the Scottish point of view, because when the defender of the Scottish national team, Stephen O'Donnell, said, I played Israel a few times and they're very good. I can't believe that they are like 80 in the world ranking. So it's very, very frustrating when your opponent said it. And yeah, if Israel, with such a good first half like yesterday, where they dominate their rival and still concede the equalizing goal and finishing with 1-1 after such a good performance, the first half, like I said, the situation is very, very complicated, especially after we lost 2-0 to Denmark earlier, and with the beginning of the World Cup qualifying. And on Wednesday, Israel will go to Moldova. This is the weakest opponent on the group, I should say. And if Israel won't get or win there, and the next time Israel will play will be in September. And if Israel didn't go to the games in September with 4 points, it will be a big problem for Mr. Rothensteiner and these players.
All right. Ram Chaim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Chana Rifkin.
Good evening, Aaron. Expect partly cloudy to clear weather tonight and tomorrow. This evening calling for lows in the 40s and 50s or between 6 to 12 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow, temperature highs will be in the 60s and 70s or between 17 to 25 degrees Celsius. Back to the studio now.
And now before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel.
מה זה? בוא נעשה לחיים. חיים, שתהי לנו בריאה ומאושרת, אמן. חיים.
I guess it's never too early to start. Terrible. All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.34 shekels to the American dollar and 2.65 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Then don't forget to visit the all-new and improved ILTV website at iltv.tv and subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates, as well as to our ILTV Telegram channel for breaking news. I'm Aaron Porras. Stay healthy, happy holidays, and thank you so much for watching.